Hello, and welcome back to the Durgama Peninsula. This will be the last or second last Durgama Takeover Week 2 video. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far, but I'm looking forward to breaking out of Haqqislam and moving on to possibly some other armies, or perhaps doing some army guides. That's something that has been requested. Let me know in the comments if you've got content that you'd like to see. This battle will be back at the Darpan Xenofarms, which means we are playing Panic Room. Now, Panic Room is a challenging scenario for many factions, actually, because it has that biotech war element, but also requires characters, HQ troops, NCOs, or number 2 troopers in order to score maximum points dominating the central room. For vanilla, this means you have the double whammy of needing to efficiently move your army out of constricted deployment zones with the biotech war plague closing in, but also you need to consider how you will actually score the objective rooms. So let's have a look at the list that I took. So there is a lot here that will be familiar. Obviously, this list is an adaptation of the sort of firefight-esque Haqqislam list that I have been using, but there are a few changes for this scenario. Probably the most notable is the presence of both biker sisters rather than just the usual Zolekia. Now, Zamira at 11 points is pretty much strictly inferior to most other Kum riders. She only has a light shotgun. She's not materially better in close combat than a regular 6-point biker. You're paying a lot of points for some minor stat adjustments, +1 ballistic skill and shock immunity. But in this scenario, she is a character, which means she can score the objective room. On top of that, I've also removed a Assassin Fidei. They aren't bad in Panic Room, but there is confused deployment, which means you're rolling a 45% chance to impersonate the model. Now, given the price point of a Fidei, I actually don't hate that, but this is an opportunity to play without one. I play with one in Haqqislam a lot, so I feel like in Panic Room, if you want to try not using a Fidei, it's totally serviceable to do so. Similarly, I've also let go of my beloved Libertos. Again, a Phys 10 model trying to confuse deploy. You absolutely can use a Libertos in Panic Room. I have before. You just roll it. You roll it and see if it gets 8 inches up the table. On a 7, 35% chance. The payoff is great. If you don't, no problem. It's still a cheap irregular order. But in the interest of trying something else different and changing how I've set my irregulars up, I've exchanged those points that I save and the removal of some additional bikers. I've put in some Matawiya instead. Now, this is pretty considered. So there's only 3 bikers in this list. There's no Dalami, and I'm using Matawiya as the hybrid offensive-defensive option. Part of that is that you have 8-inch deployment zones in Panic Room, which means accommodating bikers can be really potentially a challenge, whereas Matawiya are easier to deploy. And the offensive options for storming a Panic Room with the Jammer and the Emirat is something I wanted to experiment with. And it would end up being actually decisive. The inclusion of those 2 Matawiya in that list would really significantly affect the game. And to see why, let's have a look at my Nomad opponents list. So this is the Corregidor list that my opponent is taking. This is probably one of the biggest bastard lists I have ever seen for this scenario. It is genuinely impressively scary. So Combat Group 1 is a correctional team. It's 4 Jaguars with different weapon loadouts and a Diablos. The primary purpose of the Diablos, frankly, is that my opponent has been playing against Toha recently and wanted a model with structure because fuck Ferroware. And I sympathize with that. That's a good, you can adapt the link to include the Diablos, and it just rounds it out a little bit compared to just more Jaguars. There is a little 3-person fire team here. 2 Alguaciles, Lieutenant and a Decoy and a Missile Launcher. That Missile Launcher will just stand up and hope to waste time in ARO. It's only BS11, but it's burst 2, and if it wins even one face-to-face roll, it massively pays for itself. And in a scenario like Panic Room, forcing your opponent to spend time dealing with ARO pieces can pay dividends, because there is the biotech war plague closing in. Now, it only begins to really encroach on turn 2, but an ARO presence, some ARO presence, potentially really useful. The rest of this group is a Clockmaker and a Warcore. This is a very lightweight group, and the reason for that is Combat Group 2. 2 Gator NCOs. Those can be duoed, they make this ostensibly 5-trooper group into effectively an 8-order group to go alongside the 10-order primary group. And they are very good generally, and they are especially good in this scenario, being tags that can enter the objective room who are NCOs and therefore score the essential personnel points. The group is rounded out by a Salute, who is literally just there. This could be a transductor zone, but a Salute means the Gators can reload their mine dispensers. And then Jazz and Billy as a just very, very efficient means of rounding out the combat group. Jazz and Billy's purpose will be counter-info war. Her job will be to go after enemy hackers and Trinity them down, just to remove threat from the Gators, or potentially to repossess a Gator if it gets possessed. This list is just incredibly purely designed for this scenario, and I also think it could really effectively play just about any scenario that relies on efficiently annihilating your opponent. No McMurrah, no Senior Massacre, limited hacking presence, really strong list. So, I win the roll, and I elect to deploy second on the table side that you can see. Now, something to note about this table is that I've recently come into possession of it. It was donated to me by someone who's getting out of the game locally. They're moving away. Super grateful for them to do so. But I'm kind of still experimenting as to how to play it. How we are playing it today is, you can see the panic room is actually denoted by these barricades here. Treat it as it's the usual panic room dimensions, but it has slightly wider access points. Otherwise treated as infinitely tall, we played it as a panic room. The only other really notable thing is that something we've been trying locally, where we have these planter beds, like you can see them here and here and here. If you don't agree to how they are played, they can cause real line of fire discussions with your opponent, because the trees are a very, very irregular shape. How we've started playing those, someone else thought of this actually, but I really like it, is to just treat them as solid terrain that is the height of a Silhouette 2 model. So Silhouette 2 models can vault them, they block line of fire, etc. You can't end your movement on them. And I have liked that as an approach. And it means that there is just a little bit of cover in my deployment zone for things like bikes behind, planter beds here, and etc. So I've chosen deployment zone, not knowing what is in my opponent's list, but because this is a panic room scenario. And although I would comfortably go first in Armory, I'm not quite willing to do the same in panic room. Specifically, the reason is, in Armory, you can go first and just play the scenario really aggressively and deliberately not open the Armory gates, because then if your opponent wants to get that cheeky bottom of one scoring advantage, they've got to waste the orders opening up the Armory room, which means that you can attack them, and then they have to waste their time performing objective play, and then you can attack them again, including into the Armory. So Armory can be played with this kind of second mouse gets the cheese situation, but Panic Room starts open. So if you want to be able to score round on round on round, you either have to be prepared to attack your opponent incredibly hard, so hard that they can't survive your counter assault to dislodge you from the Armory, from the Panic Room, or you have to set up to go second. So I chose deployment, and my opponent quite reasonably wasn't game to give me deployment and turn advantage, so he elected to go first. Also to note, the way the deployment zones were configured, we kind of just set this table up a little bit ad hoc, really justified my decision to not include more than the 3 bikers. With the smaller deployment zones in Panic Room, I would have been really constrained deploying an additional quantity of bikers. To put it another way, I was rightly concerned that 8 inches would just not be able to hold all of that cum. So what we've got is we've got bikers here, here, and here. The Ghazi Matawiya are deployed there and on ground level here. We've got the duo of Asawira and Mukhtar on ground level as well, ready to move up and advance into the objective room. And then otherwise, this bridge has got a fair bit going on. It's got, or will have, an Azrael reserve dropped there. One of the Burids, the other Burid is over here. Saladin's hanging out next to this objective. And then we've got the missile bot, the flash pulse bot, and the doctor. And my plan is, and that plan isn't changed by my opponent's reserve drops, the Azrael comes down on the bridge, and now will come down on this rooftop here, ready to kind of move around here and then into base contact with the antenna, or potentially just use this rooftop to shoot. You can see an angled shot of my deployment zone here. Just, I'm in cover as best I can. I'm using this sort of like hole in the ground to hide the Fanus remote. And otherwise it's just gird down, hunker your loins, hold this 8-inch line as best I can. For my opponent's part, this rooftop here, you can't quite see them, but the little team of Alguacillos will deploy there, ready to move forward. The whole stonking Jaguar link comes down in this space here. And then his reserves, he spends a command token for an extra reserve, and yep, lo and behold, it's 2 Gators that will deploy in this space here. Billy and Jazz and the War Corps are just hanging out in this building, and everything is postured really aggressively to advance. So with an effective 10-8 order split, and not really sure what the biggest threat is, I take the coward's way out and I actually spend a command token to take 1 order from each of my opponent's pools. Now, this worked out. Ultimately, this did work out. Each group was functionally 1 order short of completing the objective that it wanted to, but there really was an argument for going either way, depending on what my priority was. So my opponent starts by moving this Jaguar link out, and this advance is where the Ghazi Matalia will be just absolutely critical in terms of stopping a complete collapse of my deployment zone. This Ghazi here with the jammer is going to be hugely relevant. So the link moves out there and there. There has to be 1 order spent just to get the Alguacillos forward, and they occupy a position, sort of the missile launcher will come here, and the other 2 will be prone in this space here, just hiding from where Nalf could shoot them. And then the rest is spent on the Jaguars. They slam forward, slam forward, slam forward, slam forward, and then they hit kind of this space here. A couple of things start happening at that point. The first is I'm beginning to get spotlight AROs from the Fanus remote. Now, my opponent keeps the heavy infantry Diablos away, so I don't get to immobilize or isolate it, but I am able to spotlight Jaguars, and as they're getting spotlight, they're also getting hit by the jammer. So the Jaguars that I am jamming are the ones that are closest to my deployment zone. I would probably take a link leader if my opponent gave it to me, but he always kept the link leader back away from the jammer. So what I do instead is I isolate the ones that are closest to me. And so what happens is what you'll see in this picture here. So here's the Jaguars moving out. Here is the first Jaguar that's been isolated and targeted. Raul Spectre is being the Diablos there. And then here's the next closest Jaguar being isolated and targeted. And at this point, there's actually been a third Jaguar has made it through. It's come around this corner here, and it's made an attack against the Matalia. But because to do that, my opponent has had to use the third furthest forward Jaguar, he hasn't been able to get it all the way around and hit my Bereed or my Azrael. Now, it would just be a shotgun, but that would still be a burst 3 shotgun template over a Bereed, which would almost certainly die, and an Azrael, which would take damage. We can see the Mukhtar has taken a hit here as part of the move through. It's gotten wounded. That's acceptable. It'll get healed over the course of the game by the Azrael Doctor, the Asawari Doctor hanging out with it. But yeah, really the story of this show is how the Ghazi jammer held the line by robbing movement effectively from my opponent. By isolating the closest Jaguar each time, it took like 3 inches and then 4 inches off of the Jaguar's advance because the tip of the spear could not be used to attack. Now what's ended up finally happening is that the Matalia has made a zone of control dodge because she's out of jammers. She's popped around here with her boarding shotgun and basically said, you bastards are not activating any further. If you do, I will shotgun the lot of you. And these isolated ones won't be able to take AROs because they can't have orders spent anymore. Like, they won't be able to take orders to dodge, so they will get shotgunned. So she's dogged. She will actually die in that spot there, but she has effectively stalled out this entire advance and been the only casualty. So that is massive. All of these orders spent on this Jaguar link, which could have crushed into the deployment zone, potentially killed the Mukhtar, gotten shots into the bikers that are around further behind. I have been saved by the presence of a Whip 15 jammer jamming out BTS 0 troops. So really happy with how that performed. It is worth noting in terms of this as an exemplar of defense, 2 things. Firstly, because this is Panic Room, we start further apart than we would normally. My opponent had an 8-inch deployment zone, I had an 8-inch deployment zone. Now, I could always choose to use that 8-inch deployment zone. Like, you can always choose to pull deeper into your DZ if you are defending, and using that distance can be really effective, or at minimum staggering your deployment so that you're using all of that space. But also, if this was not Panic Room and not Confused Deployment, you can bet your ass I would have had a Libertos and its mine straight in the deployment path of this link. Now, in that circumstance, I suspect what happens is that Diablos takes the tip of the spear, it tanks the mine, it weeds out the Libertos, but I would usually expect the Libertos to stall out that link for enough orders that this, like, literal to the order last-ditch heroic defense wasn't needed. Nevertheless, it got pulled off. Good job, Metalia. The remainder of my opponent's turn is using the Gators and Jazz. The Gators just basically slam forward to here and here, and they lay a field of mines in this space there. They actually don't go into the Panic Room. I think this is probably reasonably wise. As long as the Gators are behind this space here, then they're behind these infinitely tall walls. They're not at risk from the Azrael that I've reserve dropped down there. They can just kind of like wait things out. This is the second mouse gets the cheese situation. He's going to make me deal with the mines. The other thing as well is that what my opponent wants to do is deal with this Hassassin Bereed hacker. So Jazz will come out to here. She'll attempt first to throw a pitcher. She'll miss. She'll pull back. She'll throw a pitcher again. And she'll land it down there. But that will literally be her last order. So she won't have the orders to Trinity this guy out and kill him, which means that he is alive and generating an order on my turn. Again, if I had not stripped 1-on-1 orders, she would have had one order left to kill him, but I would have been more comfortable against the Jaguar attack. So, question mark. If I stripped 2 orders from the second group, she would never have landed a pitcher at all, and I might have been free to do some things with my hacker. But I could not have guaranteed that I would have stalled out that attack the way that I did, and there would have been one more order left to do things. Now, I suspect the one more order on this flank, this attack here would not have accomplished anything because it would have just been walking into that Metalia, but again, I couldn't know that at the time. So, my turn begins. The Ghazi Metalia keels over and dies. We make some Panic Room rolls in the Durgama Takeover special mission, where beginning of each round, troops get, with the round specifically, troops get Symbio Cuirasses. Happens on a few of my troops. You'll see little markers next to some of them over the course of the photos in this game. And we basically try and counterattack. So a lot here rests on a combination of Nelf, the Azrael. This biker will impetuous around, lay some shotgun templates, but ultimately just die, which is a bit of a shame. But then Nelf will stand up, move to here, and take out the missile launcher that's on this rooftop. And then the rest of this turn basically is a couple of things. Firstly, it's the Azrael suppressing various defenses. So the Azrael will clean off the remainder of the Jaguar link, big, heavy gun, continuous damage, chunks through dogged Jaguars, kills the War Correspondent up there, and it takes one face-to-face roll or 2 face-to-face rolls where it gets wounded, but dislodges a Jaguar from the Gator from suppressive fire, which cuts us back to here. That lets me use the remainder of the orders I have. Oh, no, there's one more thing that happens in the impetuous phase. I mentioned I had included the worse bike sister in this list because she can secure the Panic Room. In fact, what she actually just did is do nothing more than a 5-point biker would do, which is this. This is an impetuous move straight into 3 mines and a suppressive fire Gator, which totally annihilated her. Congratulations, I spent 11 points on that piece. Rip Zamira, you're the shittiest sister. You died for a good cause. So, the rest of this turn after the Asawira puts down various pieces of Overwatch is I have just enough orders left to make an attack with the Ghazi Metalia that's hanging out down here. And so it comes up this way, around there, because the War Correspondent is out of the way and the Gator is pushed back, and it yeets up this direction and starts engaging both of these Gators with its Emerat. And by the end of the turn, it will have isolated and immobilized both of them, and actually knocked one unconscious. This one here gutses into the building to get away from it, or dodges into the building to get away from it, breaking cover, which lets the Asawira clean it up. So lets the Azrael clean it up. So that's scratch 1 tag for the Azrael. Both Gators are going to be isolated and immobilized. The only problem with this turn is that to do all of that, I do not have enough orders to put anything at all into the Panic Room, and the Mutt is dogged. It dies at the end of this turn. This is still a fantastic turn. I have killed 1 Alguacile, I've wiped out that Jaguar link, and I have isolated and immobilized one gator, and isolated, immobilized, and rendered unconscious the other, but I haven't scored anything. Now, ultimately, this is probably fine because there's no retreat in this scenario, and I've gotten way up on attrition thanks to the defense that I held in the first turn. We have to see what my opponent does. So this is the game state at the beginning of round 2. Now we can see wounded Azrael. He's actually standing. He has to be. And then we've got 2 gators here and here. This one is isolated, immobilized, and unconscious. And this one is isolated and immobilized. A few things happen this turn, although of course my opponent has a lot fewer orders than he did. And he's not really getting any off of the gators because they're isolated and immobilized and one is unconscious. So he consolidates groups a little bit, and the first thing that happens is that it takes 2 orders, but Jazz blows the brains out of this this poor Bereed here through this repeater. That was always going to happen. It was unavoidable. Rip. The second thing that happens is that the engineer that is hanging out back here moves forward, and we actually sort of we tool this a couple of times to see the most efficient path, but he fixes this gator, and then he moves around here, and he cancels unconscious on this gator, but he does not have enough orders to also cancel isolated and immobilized. With the small number of orders left in group 2, so that's tactical awareness, 1 irregular order for the gator, and then an NCO order, and that's it. Those are the only orders that gator has access to. It moves around to here and it fires an explosive round at this antenna, which Saladin is hiding behind. Now it damages it, but doesn't destroy it. So he fires again and he misses. If he had hit that second time and had destroyed the antenna, antennas being destroyed when they are reduced to below 0 structure, we would have removed it, and the gator would have had a clear shot at my lieutenant. So, lesson learned there, remember that terrain is destructible. I got bailed out by my opponent, basically by me making just enough armor rolls on the antenna, and my opponent missing a shot needing a 17. It wasn't actually hugely likely. Three orders to destroy the antenna and then kill Saladin is a low overall chance of success because there are multiple things that have to happen to reach the end result of Saladin dying. But it was still a good play. A good play. If it had gone off, it would have put my opponent back in the game. It's a fantastic example of playing your outs, looking for there was nothing, there was no other play my opponent could realistically have made with 3 orders that could have been as game changing as that play. He could have reloaded and shot some mines, but that would not have been nearly as significant as potentially killing my LT, which he needed to do to get back in the game. So a good play that didn't pan out, but definitely a good play. I, at this point, basically am going to attempt to seal the deal. This Azrael, who is wounded, is going to take face-to-face rolls. He will delete this gator here, and he will move out and try and delete this gator here. Now, he actually gets knocked unconscious by an explosive round, doesn't die, that's fine. Doctor patches him back up, the helper bot is there, and some engagements later, this gator goes down, both gators are now dead. At this point, it's pretty easy for Zamira to flog her way up into the objective room. I think she completes Net Undermine on the way up, being a veteran character. She actually engages and destroys Jazz. And at that juncture, my opponent is almost completely out of stuff to do. He's well behind the 8 ball. Using just Zamira, or Zalekia, sorry. Using just Zalekia, I will secure the objective room with an essential personnel, which scores me points. Jazz actually manages to kill Zalekia next turn. Actually, I'll flip forward to that one sec. So here we can see beginning of round 2. Some things have moved forward, some things have died. Jazz is still hanging out behind this food dog. She will kill Zalekia. That's really all that my opponent accomplishes. He goes for some objectives, doesn't really get them. And then the Asawira and Mukhtar duo, it's finally their time to shine. One of the things that this duo can do, which I love, it's not going to change the game, but I do love, is the Asawira moves and the Mukhtar moves, and they've crossed paths. So I roll a 17 and the Asawira doctors the Mukhtar. Awesome. And then they just keep moving into this objective room. The Asawira is headquarters troop, so he's essential personnel, which means that he scores the room in addition to dominating at the end of the game. I have more kills, I do my classifieds, and that wraps the game up. I've completed completed my classified, I've scored the objective room for 2 of the 3 rounds, and I've got more stuff alive at the end of the game. Ultimately, this game entirely came down to being able to hold off that heavy, like aggressive turn 1 pressure. Because I was able to successfully do so, the game was mine to take, although it still required me to push through a huge amount of metal and meat in order to do so. MVP for this game is definitely the Azrael, with bonus points going to the doctor that brought him back from the dead, I think twice. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments. Otherwise, I will put a pinned link to the Durgama Takeover version of this battle report, where you will find some additional pictures not used in the video report, as well as a bonus meme. Helps me out if you'd go over there, rate it, give me a command, anything like that. Otherwise, there may be one more Durgama Takeover game. I've got one game scheduled on Sunday, which I may do a report for. Otherwise, if not, this will conclude Durgama Takeover. Let me know how you found the reports, if they've been interesting. And I've had some requests for faction guides, so I would also be interested in what factions people are interested in hearing about. And if you've gotten this far in the video, what kind of pictures and media would best accompany a faction guide? I can just record myself faffing around in Army, but there might be some better pictures that I can take or things that I can do in order to accompany those guides from a video perspective. So, as always, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.